What's going on, world? Coming at you guys again with another quick video. Nolan Wells, Ocean Springs, Mississippi, and Horn Island. Let's talk about it. So, after doing a little bit of research, it's pretty evident and pretty clear that everybody knows at this point that Mississippi is a state in which has deep historical roots for racism, slavery, the Klan, etc., etc. You know, I've said this before that for me personally, my roots in this country go back to before Columbus. And I've had family ties that have long been forgotten, to include Mississippi, specifically Ocean Springs, Mississippi. And that's through heritage of the Acadian bloodline from ancestors from France. Now, if you aren't aware, Ocean Springs, Mississippi was established by the French, I'm going to say early 1700s, very early 1700s. And it became a major area for facilitating the transatlantic slave trade. And that was primarily through individuals who were from France. So, a quick history lesson. Yes, there was slavery in France. And France had to abolish slavery not once, but twice, because it didn't take hold. And they just wanted to continue slavery so bad, they had to do it twice. And all the people left out of France and came to America, to places like Louisiana, Mississippi, etc., etc. But right now we're talking about Mississippi. We're talking about Ocean Springs, right? So Ocean Springs, Mississippi was the primary port for the transatlantic slave trade that helped bring a lot of slaves into the country, right? That worked more inland, but there were still slaves and slave quarters in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. You can check out my other post I just made. It gives a little caption of it you can read. But the roots here for slavery and lynching and whipping and all the rest of these immoral factions that happened to people of color during the transatlantic slave trade happened in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, since the early 1700s, maybe before, but we know that Ocean Springs was established early 1700s, 1699. Now, the reality situation, again, like I said before, is I have family ties that have long since been forgotten to Ocean Springs, with family ties possibly to the Acadians, for the individuals who came from France that were practicing slavery. So, again, I make these videos, I put myself at risk because, I had the opportunity to look through some of my comments for some of the videos, and people are correlating me to Judas, right? For selling out my own people, I guess you could say. But again, as I've said before, an act of inhumanity anywhere is a threat to humanity everywhere. So, this is just the nature of the beast. So, when we talk about Horn Island was actually a point that was set up for refuge for one of the place points for the Underground Railroad, for escaped slaves to make their way to an island that was far enough away to where the Union Army, which was the North, would allow these people to embark upon the vessel and then take them back to the North and, fit them and get them, ready to serve in the Union Army to fight in the Civil War. So when you guys talk about the 4th of July that happened 2026, America's 250th celebration on Horn Island, a historic and nationally recognized and preserved area for its historic recognition, for its participation in the stopping of the transatlantic slave trade, freeing slaves, supporting the Underground Railroad, and diminishing the capacity for immoral actions against people of color. When you guys are talking about Nolan Wales went out to this historic site as a person of color with up to 30 other friends, which 95% of them were white, and he's the only one that didn't come back. If that doesn't give you pause or question itself to say, let's at least make sure that something wasn't amiss. Not necessarily from the direct friends, but because there was hundreds and thousands of people there and everybody was 90% white in an area that was predominantly known historically for racism and lynching and slavery. And according to sources that are easily researchable on the internet, there are still pockets or groups of people whom still subvertly practice racist and separatist and Confederate perspectives in that community. To say that, we as a nation post Civil War and slavery shouldn't investigate this matter to make sure that we don't have individuals trying to stir up or relive the past about how and where and when people of color should be seen or heard or placed, then, the reality of the situation is you're living in a fantasy land, right? So, again, when you take all of these factors into consideration, when you talk specifically about Nolan Wales and what happened to Nolan Wales, if you are not taking a historic perspective as well as a present perspective about what could have happened to Nolan Wales, the reality of the situation is if we were back in the times pre-Civil War, you can automatically categorize yourself as an individual, whom would not have left the plantation, whom would not have joined the Union Army, whom would not have sided with abolishing slavery. Which means that if you're a person of color and you fit this narrative or stereotype to where you are questioning or the investigation of Nolan Wales to make sure there's no foul play, and I've said it before, you are suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. You are suffering from a psychological perspective of survivalism and not creationism. Because everything that you do based off of necessity because you fear for your own safety. So instead of looking at things from an objective perspective, you're looking at it from a subjective perspective, meaning that, whatever they tell you, you're just going to facilitate that and go along with it instead of thinking for yourself and utilizing a frame of reference in which may put you in a position to where your safety is not guaranteed. But as we know, Americans historically have always fought for the small person. Our most recognized and cherished motto is De Oppresso Liber. With that being said, take your time, do your own research, and remember, the most important factor about being an American is to question everything and to interact with everyone.